Да ве замолам само да ги исклучиме микрофоните сите и за кратко ќе почнеме. Големиот број од учесниците се веќе присутни. Добро утро и добродојдовте на денешната работилница посветена на водичот за Esg известување, односно за известување за прашања поврзани со животната средина, општествените прашања и управувањето, се поактуелни теми кои ги засегаат како компаниите, така и инвеститорите, но и засегнати се и општеството и економијата во целина. На почетокот да ви се заблагодарам во мое лично име и во името на организаторот на овој настан Македонска берза АД Скопје за присуството на оваа работилница и за искажаниот интерес. Уште на почетокот да напоменам дека овој настан ќе се снима и дека истиот ќе биде публикуван дополнително на веб страницата на берзата и ќе може и дополнително да се проследи. Да се представам, јас сум Зорица Асенова, правен советник во Македонска берза и бев дел од тимот за изработка на водичот за Esg известување. Водичот беше изработен со техничка подршка од Европската банка за обнова и развој, заедно со консултантите од Csrd, кои ќе имаат презентација за истиот, по чие завршување исто така е предвиден и дел за прашања и одговори наменет за котираните компании. А на почетокот своји воведни излагања ќе имаат главниот извршен директор на Македонска берза господинот Иван Штериев и представникот на Европската банка за обнова и развој господинот Роберт Адамчик. Дозволете ми накратко да кажам неколку збора и на англиски. Good morning and welcome to today's workshop. On behalf of the Macedonian Stock Exchange, I would like to thank you for your time, for being with us today. We have a pleasure to host this workshop dedicated on the Esg Reporting Guidelines. At the beginning, introductory speeches will have the representatives from the Macedonian Stock Exchange and the representative from EBRD. And after that, a presentation on the guidelines will have the consultants from Csrd. Повелате, директора.
Благодарам, Зорица. Дали е се воред со звукот? Ме слушате добро? Зорица?
Воред. Да, се слушам.
Да. Добро утро до сите. Ме радува навистина што овој наш денешен вебинар има ваква посетеност. Беа пријавени околу 100 учесници. Гледам, тоа е апроксимативно и бројката на моментално присутни. Знаете, предпоставам повеќето од вас, Македонска берза пред неколку недели веќе го објави овој свој прв водич за извештување за прашањата поврзани со животната средина, општествените прашања и управување за котираните компании или, како што одлучивме скратено да го нарекуваме, водич за Esg извештување, значи на англиска кратенка Esg Information Social and Governance. Пракса е да се употребува и во сите локални јазици, така да скратено водич за Esg извештување. Водичот е достапен веќе на нашата веб страница. Тој е, како што реков, и како што е дизајниран примарно наменет за нашите котирани компании, моментално 96 на број, но секако се надеваме дека тој ќе биде интересно четиво и водич и насока и за сите други субјекти во нашето општество и дека тој ќе поводи и поширок интерес и за користење и за примена. Во тој контекст веќе го презентиравме водичот и на Esg комитетот во рамките на Американско-македонската стопанска комора, во која берзата е членка, така да поканивме и членки на комората на денешниот ивент, вебинар, и ги поздравувам и нив, покрај котираните компании, а исто така да известам дека со PricewaterhouseCoopers разговараме и сигурно оваа година ќе ги прошириме годишните награди на Македонска берза и ќе почнеме да даваме и награда за најдобро Esg извештување и однесување. Како што спомна колешката Зорица, водичот е изработен со техничка помош од Европска банка и благодариме уште еднаш во оваа прилика, а беа ангажирани и врвни специализирани консултанти од Холандија, нашите денешни говорници од компанијата Csrd. Известувањето за одржливоста на работењето на котираните компании станува клучна димензија на развојот на модерните пазари на капитал. Зошто? Затоа што оваа проблематика, или поточно грижата за оваа проблематика, е глобален тренд пошироко во општеството. Превземањето активности за убlažување на глобалните предизвици како што се климатските промени, например, никогаш не било побитно. Прашањата на општествената нееднаквост и родовата рамноправност максимално се актуелни и секојдневно се дискутираат широм светот. Отворена е и дебатата и за примарната цел на компаниите од општествен аспект, дали е таа само профитот и дивидендите, како што се залага неолибералната доктрина, или тоа треба сепак да се редефинира и да се вклучат и некои други општествени приоритети паралелно. Големата финансиска, а сега и здравствена криза поради пандемијата ги нагласи овие прашања уште повеќе. Од тука креаторите на политиките, регулаторите и инвеститорите, примерно институционалните инвеститори, се повеќе ставаат акцент на ESG проблематиката, што придонесува се поголем дел од глобалните финансиски текови да се движат во насока на одржливи инвестиции. Креаторите на политиките и регулаторите, како што веќе напоменав, поради општествениот интерес од форсирање на овие трендови и подобри перспективи како на човештвото, така и на новите генерации, инвеститорите се повеќе ги вклучуваат овие ESG фактори во своите инвестициски стратегии и одлуки и очекуваат од компаниите детално да известуваат за своите ESG практики. Некои инвеститори ова го прават поради понапредната свесност за значењето на оваа проблематика, некои зашто сметаат дека пренебрегнувањето на ESG факторите носи ризици и опасности за идно вреднување на акциите на компаниите на пазарите, некои и поради едното и поради другите. Самите компании, а денешниот настане примерно насочен кон компаниите, стануваат, гледано глобално, се посвесни за овие фактори и почнуваат да ги интегрираат во својата организација и во процесите на одлучување. Грижата за животната средина, општествените прашања и управувањето, како и известувањето околу сето ова, им овозможува на компаниите да ги мерат директно последиците од својата дејност врз животната средина и општеството во најширока смисла, но и да управуваат со ризиците што од тоа можат да произлезат. Поради тоа, доследното интегрирање на ESG аспектите при носењето на деловните одлуки во компаниите е неизбежен чекор во функција на нивното поуспешно одржливо работење. Водечот за ESG известувањето е подготвен, имајќи предвид моменталната македонска регулатива, заложбите и регулативата на Европската Унија за одржливи финансии и меѓународните најдобри практики во оваа област, при што водечот акцептира дека праксата во Македонија околу ова е во рана развојна фаза. Македонска берза сака да има суштинска улога во олеснување на текот на ESG информациите помеѓу компаниите и инвеститорите, преку зајакнување на транспарентноста на компаниите во овој домен, обезбедување на соодветни насоки за зголемување на свесноста за овие прашања на сите пазарни учесници, како и на пошироката група на други засегнати лица. Овој водеч се надоврзува и на нашиот нов кодекс за корпоративно управување, што го публикувавме во октомври минатата година, но и обезбедува поширок контекст за имплементација на соодветно ESG известување. Со публикувањето на овој водеч, Македонска берза стана една од 60-тимите берзи во светот што имаат објавено вакво нешто. Според одредени јавно достапни информации, во светот моментално постојат над 150 берзи. Сосема на крај, да заклучиме, водечот за ESG известување на Македонска берза за нашите котирани компании треба да представува практична алатка за обелоденување поврзани со ESG проблематиката во согласно со новиот кодекс за корпоративно управување, што го развивме заедно со Комисијата за хартија од вредност и најновите меѓународни ESG стандарди. Овој водич е создаден за да им помогне на нашите котирани компании во нивните интеракции со инвеститорите во овој домен и да им помогне да разберат на кој начин интерно да се осврнат на ESG прашањата, но и како да управуваат со ESG факторите и ризиците и тоа да стане јасно видливо во јавноста и пазарно препознаемо. Ве поздравувам уште еднаш и ви посакувам успешен и корисен вебинар. Се надевам дека со ова отвараме ново поглавје во нашата корпоративна пракса, а од тука и за нашиот пазар на хартија од вредност. Ви благодарам.
Ви благодарам, директоре. Mr. Robert Adamczyk, the representative from the EBRD, will have now the introductory speech by their side. You can take the floor now, Mr. Adamczyk.
Okay, thank you very much. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development at today's event. Introduce to you the newly published guidelines on environmental, social and governance issues for listed companies. It is a great privilege to speak here today alongside our long-term partners at the Macedonian Stock Exchange. Sustainability reporting has become a core element of the development of modern capital markets. This is especially true in light of the growing pressure for policymakers, regulators, and institutional investors, which is fueling even more global financial flows to the sustainable investment. Such growth requires more transparency on how issuers manage ESG risks. Taking action to mitigate global challenges such as climate challenge and biodiversity loss has never been more crucial. And I think it's also important to note that there's much work happening at the EU level in this area. The guidelines prepared in cooperation with sustainability consultancy Csrd are in line with national legislation, EU sustainable finance considerations, and international best practice. They also take into account the newest developments of ESG reporting practices in North Macedonia. They build on the country's corporate governance code for listed companies, published in October 2021, which provided a broader view of ESG reporting context and practices. Environmentally sound investments and sustainable development lie at the heart of the mandate of the EBRD, and is underpinned in each project by our environmental and social policy. In many ways, we view it as part of our DNA. The EBRD is a supporter of the principles of responsible investment and was the first multilateral development bank to sign up to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, in 2018. Having published its first climate-related disclosure reports in 2020 and 2021, the EBRD has been pioneering sustainability finance and climate governance among its clients and partners. Under the Green Economy Transition, referred to it as GET, approach for 21-25, the bank has reinforced its position as a leader in green finance with an ambitious plan to broaden and deepen its climate activities and become a majority green bank by 2025. We see that there is a growing demand globally for consistent and comparable ESG company data as investors increasingly seek long-term value and alignment with sustainability and climate-related objectives. This issue of consistency is, I think, critical. As North Macedonia continues its path to EU accession, it will be essential to align national regulations and market practices with the EU sustainability framework and international best practices. The new guidelines will increase issuers' awareness of such practice and support them on the ESG journey. In many ways, we see it as a roadmap to help attain that. We are committed to continuing our support for North Macedonia in its transition to low carbon and climate resilient economy. In 2021, the EBRD invested 134 million in North Macedonia. Since cooperation began in 1993, the bank has committed more than 2.2 billion to 154 projects in the country, with substantial grant funding mobilization to date. In line with EBRD's target to increase its green financing, 61% of EBRD's investment in North Macedonia in 2021 was green projects. We are strongly committed to improving corporate governance standards in the country and are very pleased that following the Macedonian Stock Exchange adaptation of an improved corporate governance code for listed companies prepared with the support of the EBRD, the MSE has published its ESG reporting guidelines, helping listed companies in North Macedonia to further improve their governance and reporting. We firmly believe that the Macedonian Stock Exchange has a powerful role in facilitating the flow of ESG information between companies and investors by fostering transparency, providing guidance and services, and raising the awareness of its clients and stakeholders more broadly. The EBRD stands ready to continue supporting North Macedonia and our partners in this transition, and we look forward to today's webinar. And we very much look forward as well to financing future green projects with in the country that use these guidelines. So we're of course here to support, and it is a pleasure to be here and listen in the discussions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adamczyk. Now I will let the floor to the consultants from Csrd to have the presentation on the guidelines.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Sfdr and Mr. Adamczyk, for your introductory speeches. I think a lot has been said already. I can imagine that the work on ESG and ESG reporting can be pretty overwhelming for a lot of companies. I mean, that's even the case here. It is a process of continuous improvement. And what we have tried with the ESG guidelines was to make it as practical as possible. So we have tried to find a roadmap that will help companies in North Macedonia finding their way in ESG reporting. And we hope this will prove to be very valuable. Obviously, we have linked the guidelines to the corporate governance code that has been published in the third quarter of last year, again, to substantiate the practical solutions. Today, we will have this webinar to further introduce the guidelines to you, to put it in the context of ESG in a broader sense, and to give some guidance in how ESG reporting can be done in a practical way while meeting international best practices and standards. My colleague, Magdalena Csrd, will be leading the webinar and guide you through the presentation. There is room for discussion, obviously, and for asking questions. That can be done at the end. But if you have an urgent question while the presentation is going on, maybe we can use the app, or you can just ask the question and then we'll see whether we can answer it immediately. We look forward to a good dialogue. And also after today, if you have a question, you can also always reach out, send an email or something. So thank you all very much for your attention. We hope these guidelines will prove to be a valuable tool in taking ESG reporting further in your country, and wish you all the best. Thank you. And I give the floor to my colleague, Magdalena.
Thank you, Wouter, and good morning, everyone. I will have the pleasure to present you today the ESG reporting guidelines and also to provide you with some more practical information on what ESG is and why it is important, and how to communicate effectively on ESG issues with your stakeholders, including investors. If someone please could let me know if you can see the slide, because I think I'm sharing them, but I'm not sure if they are visible already.
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Then for some reason I cannot make them full screen. So I think it's important that we begin by defining ESG so that we have a good baseline for our discussion further on. So ESG basically means a variety of environmental, social, and governance issues that can be used to evaluate how companies are managing their sustainability performance and impact. And here you can see some examples of ESG issues that we commonly think of. So under environmental issues, we typically have things like climate change and how companies are managing their GHG emissions in mind. It also includes water and other resources use, pollution and waste, how companies are managing that, as well as impact on biodiversity. Some common examples of social issues include working conditions, employee health and safety, employee training, human rights and community relations, and product stewardship, which basically means whether a product meets quality standards and is safe to use. And when we speak about governance issues, we typically have in mind things such as corporate governance, business ethics, anti-corruption, responsible tax practices, and privacy and data security. And those ESG issues can present either a risk or an opportunity for a company. And not all of them will be relevant to your business. Different companies are exposed to different ESG issues, and we'll speak about it a bit later in the presentation to tell you how to determine which ESG issues can be relevant to your operations. But I think what is important to understand is how those ESG issues can affect your company, and also be able to communicate on that to your external and internal stakeholders. Because transparent disclosure on ESG performance is increasingly seen as a fundamental part of effective business management. Now, the stock exchanges can play a very important role in encouraging greater transparency and promoting sustainable development. This is because they basically sit between investors and issuers, and therefore they can convey the expectations of the capital markets to their listed companies and encourage them to adopt more responsible and transparent business practices. And Macedonian Stock Exchange is very aware of that. And to that end, they recently has published two documents that have been already mentioned. This is the Corporate Governance Code and the ESG Reporting Guidelines. And those documents really can be used by the companies to strengthen their approach to corporate governance and to also broader ESG issues. And in the table here on the slide, you can see how those two documents interact with each other, and also what are some major differences between them. So the Corporate Governance Code, of course, focus on the governance issues as a main thing. And it also includes some corporate governance principles that companies listed on the Macedonian Stock Exchange should observe in line with the comply or explain principle. But it also includes some ESG topics, specifically section 6 of the code, which is called Stakeholder Sustainability and Social Issues, includes some reference to ESG. And so when developing the guidelines, we wanted to make sure that the guidelines will help companies to fulfill those provisions that relate to sustainability. So inside the guidelines, you will find the reference to the Corporate Governance Code. And beyond, of course, the guidelines itself, they focus on a broader set of ESG issues. So they look beyond governance. They look also on the environmental and social side of things. And they will design to help companies understand ESG in a broader sense and start applying it within the context of their operations and reporting. Now let's have a look. Let's have a closer look into the guidelines themselves. So how they came about. The guidelines were developed as a result of the collaboration between the Macedonian Stock Exchange and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And we at Csrd were responsible for executing this project. And you can also see that this was a multi-step collaborative process that included consultation with different stakeholders, including issuers and local financial market participants. And some of you might have participated in those stakeholder engagement sessions that took place last year. And now the result of that work are the guidelines, and we are also having this capacity building event today to further help you understand the ESG and how you can use the guidelines. So here you can see how the guidelines look like for those of you who have not had the chance yet to see the document. There is over 40 pages that cover all relevant information with regard to ESG and include also some recommended disclosure and performance indicators to facilitate reporting. The guidelines were prepared in 2 language versions, Macedonian and English, and you can download them both from the Macedonian Stock Exchange website. And they really were developed to serve a few purposes. And first of all, they should support you in better investor-oriented ESG disclosure in line with both local and global market needs. They should also provide you with a good background information on what the ESG is, why it is relevant, and what are some key elements of effective ESG communication. And also, they should help you understand the broader context on the ongoing regulatory developments, existing standards and frameworks that companies are using to report on sustainability, and broader company practices. And finally, the ultimate goal is to help advance ESG integration in North Macedonia and to bring in subsequent benefits. And before we look into the content of the guidelines, I think it is also important to clarify what these guidelines are and what they are not. So first of all, they consider expectations of the financial market participants, specifically having the investor perspective in mind. They also build on the existing internationally accepted reporting standards and frameworks. And what is very important, they consider relevant provision of the Macedonian Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Code. But they are not a new reporting standard, and they do not introduce new reporting obligations for companies, nor do they replace existing legal obligation. Rather, they were designed to be used by the companies on the voluntary basis. So they are really here to help you with your reporting process and to support you in that. And here is a quick overview of what you can find inside of the document. So you can see that the first 3 chapters, they are there to provide you with all the basic information about ESG and ESG reporting. So they define the ESG, they help you understand the benefits of improved ESG performance and reporting, and also help you understand what are some key drivers of the corporate ESG reporting. And we will also go over them today. And then they also have all the basic information on what you should consider when thinking about ESG reporting. So what formats should you use? Whether you want to follow an international reporting standard or framework, and also reporting on climate change, which is increasingly important. And it was very key to include that as well. And then in chapter 4, we wanted to include some more practical information on how to start the ESG reporting process. And there we included a step-by-step process that you can use to build your ESG report. And I will not go over this because we'll just come back to it in just a few seconds. This will be also covered as part of this presentation. But I wanted to draw your attention to the appendices because these are typically the last thing in the documents, and people tend to miss them or not have a look at them. But we wanted to include some more resources that might be useful for you. And in the appendices, you can find a list of recommended minimum disclosures and KPIs, also a simplified materiality map that can be helpful in determining which ESG issues are relevant to your business, and an overview of relevant EU regulations and reporting frameworks. All right, so we have talked about the ESG and what is included in the guidelines itself. But I think it's important that we take a moment now also to discuss why ESG reporting is becoming so important and where is this trend really coming from. And as you can see on this slide, there are really two major forces behind it. The changing regulatory environment, particularly here in Europe, in the European Union, there is a lot of things going on the regulatory front and a lot of new regulations that require companies and investors to become more transparent on how they are approaching ESG issues. And the second thing is the shift in how investors are approaching ESG in the investment processes. And that also links back to the regulations, which do not only target companies, but also investors. And therefore, investors are also feeling that they are pushed to do more on this front. And of course, there are other factors that drive this trend, such as societal expectations. For example, but in today's presentation, I think it is really crucial that we focus on those two and try to understand how they will be fueling this trend in the future as well. So let's have a look what's going on the regulatory front first. In the EU, as you can see here, there are quite a few regulations that were introduced as part of the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan. And they ask companies to, and investors as well, to report on ESG issues. And you may think at first that this is not immediately applicable to you in North Macedonia. However, as an EU accession country, North Macedonia is expected to implement EU rules and regulation in order to meet the conditions for the membership. And therefore, it is key for businesses here to already start preparing for those regulations. Therefore, we felt that this is really important to speak about it and to help you understand what kind of regulation might soon be relevant, or might be relevant already if you have investors that are active on the European markets. So the single most important regulation in the EU that requires companies to disclose certain ESG information is the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, or NFRD in short. And in line with those in this directive, large public interest entities that have more than 500 employees and meet one of the two additional financial criteria, they have to report how they are managing issues related to environment, social and employee matters, as well as bribery and anti-corruption. And at the moment, this directive is applicable to about 11,000 companies in Europe, in the European Union. But it is revised and it will be replaced soon with the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, or CSRD in short. And you can see on the slide here some key changes that it will mean for the companies. And first of all, the biggest change is that the number of companies to which CSRD will be applicable is expected to more than quadruple. So the directive will cover all large companies. That means companies that have more than 250 employees and meet additional criteria in terms of their turnover and total assets. And later on, it will be extended to all companies, including non-EU companies, which have securities listed on the EU regulated markets. So I think this is a really big change. And on top of that, it will also require companies to report much more detailed information than NFRD is asking them at the moment. So the proposal for the CSRD was announced in April last year, and the CSRD is expected to be adopted in 2023, which means that from 2024, companies will already have to start reporting according to the new requirements. And then coming back to what else is going on the European regulatory front, we also have a EU taxonomy, which is a classification system that aims to define what type of economic activities can be considered sustainable. And this, the taxonomy will also introduce some reporting requirements for the companies. And it will be applicable to all those companies that are in scope of NFRD or future CSRD. So those two regulations really are go hand in hand. If you already fall under NFRD, you will have to fulfill the requirements of the EU taxonomy in terms of reporting. And beyond that, we also have Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, Sfdr, which is, on the other hand, applicable to the financial market participants, so investors who offer financial products on the European market, such as asset managers, pension funds, banks, and insurers. And the Sfdr really requires investors to be more transparent about how they are approaching sustainability risks and ESG in general. And that means that those investors, in order to fulfill their own reporting obligations, will ask more ESG data from the portfolio companies or from the companies that they are considering for investing. Therefore, even though the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation might not be applicable to you as companies, especially non-financial companies, it will be it might have some consequence in terms of more requests from the investors about ESG data. And beyond that, the climate change is reporting on climate change is really becoming very critical. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD, recommendations provide a very good framework for disclosing climate-related information, and over the years they have really become the go-to framework for companies to report on climate, and so the governments also have been starting to recommend or to ask companies to report against TCFD and implement it in the regulatory frameworks on the national level. And for example, UK and Switzerland are some of the governments that already are requiring companies to disclose on climate in line with TCFD, and those requirements will also be soon part of the European framework, because TCFD is very likely to be integrated in the CSRD directive. So this will become a baseline for reporting on climate change in Europe as well. And on the other hand, on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that globally ESG, or sustainable investing, is really taking off and is becoming a mainstream. And the regulations certainly help to speed up this paradigm shift. And as a result, investors' approach to investing has changed, and the expectations from the companies are also changing as well. And you can see on the graph below that global ESG assets are expected to grow very rapidly, and according to Bloomberg estimates, they are on track to reach 1/3 of all projected total global asset under management by 2025. So we in our sector, we were all like a few years ago, people were saying that ESG investing, ESG is just a niche activity in the investment community. I think with such a big numbers as we are seeing now and that are projected for the future, this is no longer the case. So definitely this trend will continue to be strong. And while we talk about what companies have to do, all the pressures, the regulatory pressures, the pressure from investors, etc., I think that is also important that we speak about the fact that many companies are integrating ESG voluntarily for many years because they see benefits of improved ESG performance and disclosure. And there are like few things that we can, there are few categories when we can, how we can group those benefits. And for many companies, this is helpful because it improves their risk management and it helps them to avoid negative impacts related to their operations. It can also help to enhance their operational performance, for example, resulting in some efficiencies and cost reduction throughout operations, etc. It can be a way to gain competitive advantage, to gain access to new markets and to new customers as well. It can help to manage the reputational risk and improve engagement with stakeholders. And last but certainly not least, because ESG issues are increasingly considered by investors and other financial institutions such as banks and insurers, the good management and disclosure of ESG issues or lack of such disclosure can affect companies' access to capital and financing. Okay, so we have covered now the what and the why, and I think we can have a look now on how to start the ESG reporting process. And in the guidelines, in Chapter 4, we have included a step-by-step process which you can follow to help you with that. And you can see it on the right-hand side of the slide now. And this process really includes 6 steps that you can consider when preparing your ESG report. And I would also point out that the process was designed specifically to fulfill ESG-related provisions of the Corporate Governance Code. And you will see reference to the code throughout the slides. And also you can see them in the guidelines themselves. There are some specific excerpts from the Corporate Governance Code included in the guidelines to help you understand which section it relates to. So I would like to walk you through all those steps now, and please take note also that after each steps we included some self-assessment questions that should help you to determine whether the actions that you are taking are sufficient, or maybe you should consider doing a bit more in those particular areas. So the first step would be to identify your key stakeholders, because they will be most likely to be the main audience of your report. And therefore you should consider what are their needs and expectations and what kind of information they are looking for. So who are your stakeholders? These are all kinds of people and organizations that may impact or be impacted by your organization and your operations. So typically we can divide them into internal stakeholders, being the employees, the managers, and the owners of the company, and external stakeholders, which include a long list of different groups of people or organization that you might impact on the external side of your business, and that could be customers, that could be suppliers, your creditors and investors. It could be also the local community, so all the people around your operations that you might affect through your business activities, or the government. And you should engage with them to get the feedback from them on what is important to them and what they would like to see you doing. And in order to do that, in order to collect that feedback, you can use really different avenues, including outreach events and stakeholder consultations, where you proactively organize an event to reach out to those groups and invite them to speak about things that matters to them. It could be through surveys, so it could be employee surveys, employee satisfaction surveys, customer satisfaction surveys. This is also a great way to gather some feedback from stakeholders, and it could be also targeted interviews when you speak with industry experts or other relevant people to get some more information on what is important in your industry, in your operations, and in your environment. And the Macedonian Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Codes ask you to ensure that there are effective mechanisms in place to identify main stakeholders and to understand their views and expectations, and also to conduct regular engagements with them. So you should, and in addition to that, you should also keep your supervisory board informed about the results of that actions and report on that in your annual report. And on the left-hand side, you can see the self-assessment questions that can help you figure out whether you are sufficiently addressing these issues. And I will not read them now because I think they are included in the guidelines as well, and the slides will probably also share with you, so you can have a look, take the time, have a look at them, and really reflect on those after the webinar. But I encourage you to do so because this will be very helpful in seeing whether there are any gaps that you should start addressing. The step number 2 would be to define the content of the report based on the materiality assessment. And companies may be really exposed to a wide range of ESG issues, and materiality is something that can help you determine which ESG issues are really relevant to you. And so when you think about materiality, other way to look at it is what are the issues which are really important from the risk management and strategic decision-making perspective. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing that you can start doing is to understand what ESG issues are important or material in your sector of operations, because companies in the same sector are typically exposed to very similar ESG risks. And you can use resources available at the SASB website, which is the sustainable reporting framework that is really looking at the ESG issues on the sector level. They have a very sector-based approach to reporting on ESG, and they have a lot of very useful resources, including a materiality finder tool, which can help you to identify risks that are ESG risks and issues that are relevant in your sectors. And another way to do that would be to have a look at what are your competitors considering material. Look at the sustainability reports. Have a look at your peers, both locally and internationally. This is a great source to take some inspiration and see what your peers are reporting on and what ESG issues they consider to be material to them. And once you do that, then you should have a look at your business model, your strategy and objectives, and your risk throughout entire value chain. So you have a list of ESG companies, and now you should filter them out through the perspective of your business, through your individual characteristics that you have as a business, and see if all of them are still relevant, if there might be some additional things that are very specific to the way you operate that you might want to add to that list. And you, of course, should also have a look, should consider and be sure to include the expectations of your stakeholders. So here we are coming back to the step number 1, where you need to first know what stakeholders will be key for you and actively engage with them. And once you have a list of all the issues that are material to you, now it will be important to prioritize them as well, because not all of those issues will have similar weight and similar importance to you. there will be probably issues that are really critical to start addressing right away, and those which, you know, are not as important, but are still important to take care of. So you can see here on the left-hand side some questions that can help you to determine how to prioritize those issues. And these are things such as, does the issue have a material financial impact on your company? Can it lead to some costs, some fines? Can it have really an impact on your finances? Is it regulated by legislation or industry-specific standards and codes? If so, then probably it is considered quite relevant for the industry, and you should also be prioritizing those issues. Is it strategically important to your company because perhaps you have included it as a part of your sustainability strategy and your business objectives, and it's very important that you're prioritizing this particular issue? And how is it perceived by the stakeholders? And you can see here the materiality matrix, where typically companies place different issues depending on their relevance to their own operation and to their stakeholders, and that can help to determine how to approach those issues. And then the next step would be to describe how sustainability is governed in your organization. And to do that, you should explain your sustainability and strategy and targets. And these are things that really define your ambition when it comes to managing sustainability. And they will also allow you to measure progress over time without having any objectives or any vision on where you want to go with the sustainability actions. You will not be able to manage and measure that properly. So you really have to think about the strategy and your targets as a first thing in order to then be able to translate it into some smaller actions throughout your operations. Then you should also be sure to assign roles and responsibilities for the sustainability strategy, because without it, you will not be able to effectively implement it. And this can also help to signal whether there is a leadership commitment to sustainability in your organization and a top-down approach to managing sustainability issues. So what you should do is describe whether there is a board oversight of sustainability issues and how responsibility for daily implementation is assigned as well. And there, finally, there should be relevant policies and procedures as they allow to operationalize the sustainability strategy. And they really help to clarify what are your company commitments and provide guidelines as to how the strategy should and should not be implemented. So these are really critical for anyone in the company to know how to behave in certain situations and how to approach certain issues on a more detailed level. And the code of governance, the corporate governance code, really very explicitly asks companies to implement strategy to promote sustainability issues and also to implement relevant policies and procedures, and make sure that those are publicly available and reviewed by the supervisory board regularly. And again, you can check if you meet those requirements by answering the questions on the left, which are also available in the guidelines themselves. And then the step number 4 would be to describe how ESG risks are managed in your organization. And first of all, to do that, you need to know what are your key ESG risks, and this should be already taken care of by conducting the materiality analysis and determining which ESG issues are relevant for your organization and can lead to significant risk, and what are the probability of those risks occurring. And once you know which ESG risk you should be managing, then you need to have a process to monitor that, to manage that, and to hopefully also mitigate those risks before they occur. And the final thing would be also to have a process for reporting concerns. And this is also something that is emphasized in the Corporate Governance Code. The section number 5 of the code asks companies to ensure that there is a system in place to report suspected or actual violations of rules or misconduct. And this is called the whistleblower mechanism or whistleblower procedure. It also asks companies to ensure that ESG risks are integrated in the business model and risk management system. And again, the questions here can help you see if this is addressed sufficiently, if we are doing already things that are required. And finally, you should present your ESG report in your ESG report, your activities and results for the reporting period, and they should be directly related to the material ESG areas. And you can do that by providing some quantitative metrics that can help to visualize the progress that you have achieved. You should also add the qualitative narrative to illustrate progress and provide some more contextual information to the presented data. This really helps to understand readers the number and also understand where the company is, what is the direction where the company is going to with this. And you should also remember to include references to relevant sustainability policies whenever this is relevant. So when you speak about environment, make sure that you have reference to the environmental policy. When you speak about human rights, you should have a human rights policy reference mentioned there. And also to help you with this whole process, there are some tools and resources, and specifically Appendix A in the guidelines should be helpful in fulfilling some of those requirements and really making sure that you report on the right things in your ESG report. It includes some recommended minimum disclosures and KPIs that companies should consider as part of the reporting process. And those recommendations relate to both policies and procedures. So there are specific indicators that help you understand what policies you should disclose and what kind of elements those policies should include, how to develop those policies and what kind of areas should be covered by them. And there are also performance-related quantitative metrics that really can showcase your performance within a reporting year. And again, this is something that is also required by the Corporate Governance Code. I think last but not the least, the last step is to consider ESG information needs throughout this whole process. And here is a summary of some important points to consider. So first of all, again, materiality. This is perhaps the single most important thing that you should think of when reporting on ESG issues. Don't report on anything and everything. Focus on the issues that are material to your business and really make sure that you spend enough time with your report to describe those issues and the actions you are taking to address them. And then make sure that the disclosure is objective and balanced. So here again, the ESG report is not a marketing material. It should really provide a well-balanced view of the company operation. So you should avoid any misstatements or omissions. You should include information on both positive and negative developments. If there was something negative happening at the company, it's good to address it in the report and provide an explanation how the company, what the company is doing to fix that and to avoid such a situation in the future. And also be clear about the scope and the boundaries of your reporting, because this is very important for the end user, especially when you report on the quantitative metrics. For example, you report CO2 emissions, but you were not able to collect this data for all your operations, and you have those informations just for a few segments of your operation. Make sure that you're very clear about it, that does not cover your company-wide operation, but only some percentage of your operations. And then you should strive for the disclosure to be strategic and forward-looking. Connect what you report with your sustainability strategy and objectives, so that the readers have a clear view of where you are at the moment and where you want to be in the future. And also how you're planning to get there, because this is very important as well. And be clear and concise. The reports should not be super long, and neither investors nor the ESG analysts have time to read really extensive reports. So you should make sure that the most important information can be easily found and is concise and to the point. And reporting excessive or irrelevant information can really lead to the confusion, and it can also obscure some key message. So shorter is better, I would say, especially when you're thinking about investors as the audience of your reporting. And then make sure that your reporting is comparable and reliable. And what I mean here is that investors tend to have a preference for quantitative data. And that's really is because of how they're operating. It's easier to collect quantitative data, and it's easier to compare such data between companies. So think about it when you construct your ESG report, but also don't forget to provide additional narrative to explain your results and provide some context to the data, because even though the data is searched for the investors, it is not enough just to have the numbers. You need to explain the numbers as well. And finally, disclosure should be verifiable, and this is something that we see increasingly globally and also in Europe, that in order to increase data credibility, companies often decide to externally assure the ESG reports or parts of the reports, for example, just the quantitative data, by an independent third party. And this is like a stamp of assurance, providing additional level of security for the investors, so they know that this data is correct and they can use it in the analysis with more confidence. And yeah, that is it when it comes to the slide. I hope this overview was helpful to you, especially to those of you who are new to ESG reporting and might be feeling overwhelmed by the amount of information and by the amount of initiatives that are out there when it comes to sustainability and ESG. I think even though it is overwhelming and there is no denying that, I would strongly advise you to just start doing it, even if it feels a bit difficult at the moment. The ESG reporting is something that no one gets right away. It's a process of continuous improvement, and you will get better at it with practice, as with anything else. And any ESG reporting, no matter how limited it might be at the beginning, is better than no ESG disclosure at all, especially with all the regulatory changes coming up and the investors' demand for the ESG data increasing. It's better to start early. It's better to build capacity and be prepared for what is coming in the future, for sure. So thank you very much. I'll open the floor now to the questions and to discussion. So if anything wasn't clear, if you have any additional things that you would like us to speak about, then please ask it now.
Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you, Wouter, for your presentation. Ги повикуваме котираните компании пред се нивните представници, затоа што како што напоменавме, овој водич е пред се наменет за нив да им послужи како практична алатка во процесот на исполнување на обврските кои што Кодексот за корпоративно управување ги предвидува во врска со прашањата кои се однесуваат на животната средина, општествените прашања и управувањето. Повелете. Ако нема никој што ќе се јави за збор, да напоменам дека ние секако сме отворени за соработка и во иднина во однос на примената пред се на Кодексот и во однос на овој водич, докато имате дополнителни прашања, но сега е можност да поразговараме, да продискутираме и со консултантите на оваа тема. Па уште еднаш еве да ве охрабрам да се јавите за дискусија.
Well, maybe if it's easier, if there are any questions that you would like to send us by email, you can also do that. We can also respond to you via email if there are more information required. Maybe it's too early to start asking questions yet, and you need some time to process the guidelines and get acquainted with them. But we're always there and happy to answer any questions if there are at the later stage, and we can respond to them by email.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Еве, како што спомена Магдалена, имате можност и допълнително да поставите прашања и по имейл. Може да ги доставите до имейлот на Македонска берза mse.org.mk, па ние ќе ги проследиме до консултантите и допълнително ќе добиете одговор. Ако нема никој за дискусија денес, да ви се заблагодарам на сите за присуството, да се заблагодарам на представниците на ЕБРД и на консултантите и да им посакам на котираните компании успех кон ESG известувањето. Ви благодарам на сите, имајте убав ден.
Приятно.
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 Приятно.